we have two big stories to analyze for you. Both are major legal decisions. Both raise the question of what is justice. One is easy to explain, one is hard. Let's start with the easy one. The January 6th decision, a unanimous vote to have former President Trump testify before the January 6th committee. A number of Republicans testified to troubling plans known to, encouraged, and otherwise desired by Trump, and refusing to respect the election outcome regardless of basis. There are also questions about how far in advance was he planning to not accept the election, about his knowledge of what might happen on January 6th, and of course his actions during the actual violence at our Capitol. The panel is almost all Democrats. Now, here's the analysis. They clearly have the authority to call Trump to testify, and they have the motivation as well. Is it fair under the law? Yes. So they have the right. But that's not the only question. They have the right, but is it the right call? A better form of question here may be, is it worth it? That'd be the more relevant way to ask, I would suggest, because this is a political setting. My answer, no. I mean, yes, if you're a staunch Democrat, but this is a play, therefore, to the base. My suggestion is it best for you, the majority that wants more solutions and less drama? What's going to happen? The former president will likely fight it. And even if he does testify, which I think at this point is unlikely, certainly in a way that you'll ever find out about openly, despite stories about how former President Trump has struggled in past depositions, his contention that he believes the election was rigged and that he understood why people were angry on January 6th but didn't plan anything to do with it will leave us at an impasse, won't it? And before you say, don't speculate, he just put this out right after I wrote these words. Quote, the unselect committee knowingly failed to examine the massive voter fraud which took place during the 2020 presidential election, the reason for what took place on January 6th. Now, look, factually, that statement is flawed, but the politics of this really won't pay much attention to that. So the bottom line is it won't likely advance any case against him and will certainly foment tension. But those are mostly political considerations. The next case is much harder to analyze. The Parkland verdict. Very hard to rationalize, very hard. This guy evokes every instinct for righteous retribution of revenge. Most of the families want him put to death. Most of the families who lost loved ones. They say, if this isn't the time for the death penalty, when is it? And that's a hard question to answer. There is a question of law, a drive of emotion, and a stubborn suggestion about morality. This is a bad guy who admits to doing horrible things to innocent kids and staff on purpose. 14 kids murdered, 3 staff, more than a dozen injured. Many survived, but will never be the same. There wasn't even a trial on the merits. He pleaded guilty to all counts. And the jury believed unanimously that the prosecutors had shown that the aggravating factors required under the law to trigger the death penalty exist. But the law is newly exacting in Florida. One step sideways. Florida has had the death penalty since 1827. It is the home of Old Sparky, that infamous electric chair. But where are we as a society? States have been moving away from capital punishment. More than half of the states still have it, but not all use it. 107 countries have abolished it. The United States, Japan, China, and a handful of others are lone holdouts in the developed world in aggressively pursuing killing as justice. Why? 2 reasons: mistakes and a moral dilemma. Florida has killed 100 people over the years, almost all of them for far less than the Parkland massacre. Florida has also had 30 exonerations on death row, meaning someone who was found to have been not guilty. So for every 3 killed, 1 was exonerated. Now that's a scary ratio, but it's irrelevant here. Why? The Parkland massacre man admitted that he did it. So this isn't about getting it wrong. And yet, for the long history of killing, Floridians are not in favor of killing the convicted anymore. Recent polls, 35% in favor, 62% no. Life in prison is the ultimate punishment. And we see in Florida changes in the law that reflect this change in opinion. For decades, the law only required 7 out of 12 jurors to recommend the death penalty, and then the judge got the decision. and he or she had to assess if aggravating factors existed for the death penalty. So basically, the decision would come down to one man saying, live or die. In 2017, the law changed, taking it away from one judge and putting it on the entire jury, requiring unanimous jury agreement to prove aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt. And here's the key part, then setting the aggravating factors, things that made the crime even worse, against mitigating factors, okay? Things that reduce the severity of the crime. So essentially, the law was changed to set it up to favor a minority vote, essentially making it harder for someone to get the death penalty. Now, in 2020, Florida's Supreme Court tried to change it back, but lawmakers refused. Now, again, in Parkland, the jury found that prosecutors showed the murders included aggravating factors. Like what? They were heinous, they were atrocious, they were cruel. But aggravating factors, again, have to outweigh mitigating factors, factors under the new law that would reduce the severity, make the murderer somehow less bad. One juror found mitigating factors, including the killer having brain damage from the mother's excessive drinking, in her opinion, being bullied, and having a slew of disorders and mental illness as outweighing the aggravating factors. One vote is enough under the law, and then two more jurors agreed with the first one. Now, that is not that unusual. A move toward mercy is seen in states even when they pursue capital punishment. In Colorado in 2015, you remember that guy who shot up the movie theater, murdered 12 innocents, injured 70 more? They gave him life in prison. Now, the hard part for many is accepting that one juror keeps this guy alive when so many who have been damaged want death, and that the law allows for death. Politicians are protesting, playing to the righteous indignation. That makes sense. It's an obvious political play to anger. Because our politics are not about playing against popularity or discounting anger. They're all about fomenting anger these days. And yet we should ask the hard question. When is it okay to kill? Is it ever okay? Is man ever allowed to decide who lives and dies? Now, Christians and other religions struggle with this, and we have a range of answers. The fifth commandment, of course, is thou shalt not kill, suggesting only God decides who lives and dies. Jesus' message, love, mercy, suggests the same. But we have been killing people as a society pretty much from the beginning. It is maybe the toughest tug on our sense of right and wrong, a social instruction that killing can be okay, and not just in self-defense. The desire for vengeance is hardwired, especially when it comes to protecting the weak, protecting our children, the innocent, especially when they are threatened by someone on purpose out of evil intent and the person admits it. We see how confusing this can get. Abortion is wrong. Why? Because you couldn't kill a person. You shouldn't kill a person, and that's what's inside the womb, a person. That's the argument, right? But killing a murderer is okay. Why? Because some people deserve it. That's the answer at the end of the day, isn't it? The baby doesn't deserve it. The man who kills does. Says who? Says us. Ultimately, the law dictates what our social instruction will be. Some see the death penalty as beneath us, a social instruction in brutality that undermines the goal of civility. And yet it is allowed under our Constitution and in the state of Florida. And it often feels like the only satisfaction, an eye for an eye, as the Bible provides. And now one juror was joined by two others in finding that under the law, the standard was not met, in obvious defiance to what it seems the community wants. So is it the right decision? The law was followed, but is it justice, defined as fairness under the law? Even though this guy seems to be the worst of the worst, even though the people most affected want it, and the anger is real and palpable, is that merely caving to a mob? You know, I've been studying this issue for a long time, and I often think to myself, and you should do the same, what would I do if someone badly hurt, let alone shot up and murdered someone I love? What would you do? I think there's a good chance if I could get my hands on them, I would try to kill them. What does that mean? Is that me at my best? It's hard to say yes. Should our social instruction reinforce what we want at our most angry, at our most passionate? Many victims' families want vengeance, but many more have told me over the years that it doesn't matter to them because nothing brings back the loved one. Or that life in prison, if they're denied comforts, and that's a big if, is worse than death. In fact, when you talk to a lot of lifers, they say they'd rather die. And many of them find ways to get killed in prison or kill themselves. So if the point is to punish, is death too good for people like the Parkland mass murderer? It's hard to see all the families in pain again. And yes, it feels this guy is getting away with something. But the law was followed, and one juror is enough. It is designed, like many of our criminal laws, to allow for a high bar to punish, let alone the ultimate punishment. At the end of the day, the answer comes down to this. What do we want to be about? And that can be a tough question to answer, especially when you're in pain.